was known only to a select few, and the one man in the ring who was never, ever supposed to speak. This is the story of how a referee's conscience exposed the brutal, hidden truth behind John Cena's last match. The air was electric. In the autumn of 2023, the impossible happened. John Cena, the ghost of WWE's past, the conquering hero of a bygone era, came home. It wasn't a one-night appearance, a wave to the crowd, a simple nostalgic pop. This felt different. This felt real. He was back in the trenches, lacing up his boots not for a movie role, but for a fight. For weeks, we watched him, the salt and pepper in his hair betraying the years, but the fire in his eyes burning as bright as it did in 2005. He spoke of one more run, a phrase that sends shivers down the spine of any wrestling fan. It's a promise of hope, a bargain with time, a chance to see your hero conquer the mountain just one last time. The WWE Universe, a generation that grew up with the mantra of hustle, loyalty, and respect, believed him. They needed to believe him. Every week, Cena gave everything. He battled the Bloodline, the most dominant and menacing faction in modern wrestling. He put over young talent. He stood side by side with LA Knight. But a shadow loomed over him, the specter of Solo Sikoa, the enforcer, a man of few words and devastating violence. The match was set for Crown Jewel in the heart of Saudi Arabia on a stage built for legends and kings. The narrative was perfect. The aging warrior, the embodiment of the company's ideals, against the silent, unstoppable monster of the new era. It was a story as old as time itself. And every single fan, whether they admitted it or not, held onto the desperate hope that David would once again slay Goliath, that John Cena, the man who never gives up, would find a way. Just one more time. The atmosphere in that stadium was thick with devotion. Chants of "Let's go Cena" echoed like a prayer. This wasn't just a wrestling match. It was a validation of a childhood, a testament to a legacy. But the ending wasn't a storybook. It was a horror film. It wasn't a defeat. It was a dismantling. A brutal, systematic, and chillingly efficient destruction. As Cena lay there motionless, after a barrage of Samoan spikes, the world went silent. He was left alone, a fallen idol in the center of the ring. He took it all in, his face a canvas of pain and gratitude before giving a final, heartbreaking wave. The hero had lost. But what we're about to tell you is that his fate was sealed long before the bell ever rang. This wasn't a loss. It was a corporate hit. In the chaotic theater of professional wrestling, there is an invisible man. He wears stripes, not a championship belt. His job is not to inspire cheers or boos, but to remain unseen, a silent arbiter in a world of manufactured chaos. This man is the referee. For over 2 decades, one of the most trusted men in stripes was Jake, the Eagle Henson. They called him the Eagle for a reason. Nothing escaped his sight. He had officiated thousands of matches, from WrestleMania main events to untelevised house shows in the middle of nowhere. He'd seen it all, the triumphs, the heartbreaks, the legitimate injuries, and the backstage politics that bled into the ring. Jake was a man of integrity, a dying breed in a business built on secrets. His creed was simple. Call it down the middle, protect the talent, and above all, keep your mouth shut. The story the office tells in the ring is the only story that matters. But on that night in Riyadh, Jake Henson saw something that would test his silence to its breaking point. It wasn't a botched move or an illegal weapon. It was something far more subtle and far more sinister. He was the referee for Cena versus Sikoa. During his final pre-match checks, as the deafening roar of the crowd shook the foundations of the stadium, he noticed the atmosphere backstage was different. Tense, a senior producer, a man who reported directly to Triple H, pulled him aside. This was not unusual. Final instructions were common, but the words were not. The producer didn't look Jake in the eye. His gaze was fixed on some distant point, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Let it play out," he said. "No matter what, let it play out." Jake nodded, confused. Of course he would. That was his job. But then the producer added something else, a phrase that stuck in Jake's mind like a splinter. "John understands the narrative. Make sure the narrative is protected." Narrative. It was a word he'd heard 1,000 times. But the emphasis, the cold, corporate finality in the producer's tone, felt wrong. During the match, Jake tried to dismiss it. He focused on the action, the powerful collisions between the two titans. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was officiating a funeral, not a fight. He saw it in Cena's eyes, a resignation, a deep, profound sadness that was there even before the beating truly began. Then midway through the match, Jake glanced towards the gorilla position, the entrance curtain. For a split second he saw him, Paul Levesque, Triple H. He wasn't in his usual spot. He was standing in the shadows, arms folded, watching with an unnerving stillness. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no emotion on the game's face, just the cold, hard stare of a man watching a plan come to fruition. At that moment, Jake Henson knew. This wasn't a contest, it was a script, and the final chapter was written in blood and betrayal. Have you ever wondered what secrets are hidden in the chaos of a WWE ring? Let us know your wildest theories in the comments below. We read all of them. A few weeks after Crown Jewel, the wrestling world had moved on. John Cena was gone. The Bloodline story continued its relentless march. The machine kept running, but Jake the Eagle Henson couldn't move on. The image of Triple H in the shadows, the producer's cold words, Cena's sad eyes, it was a toxic cocktail brewing in his soul. Then the inevitable happened. Jake received a call from WWE Talent Relations. His contract, after 22 years of loyal service, was being terminated due to budget cuts and a restructuring of the refereeing division. Jake knew the real reason. In the world of WWE, silence is golden, and his conflicted energy must have betrayed his knowledge. He was a loose end, so they cut him loose. For weeks, Jake was adrift. His career, his life's work, gone in an instant. But with the loss of his job came a strange sense of freedom. He no longer had to protect their secrets. He no longer had to be the invisible man. He didn't go to the big wrestling journalists or the major sports networks. That would have been dismissed as sour grapes, a disgruntled ex-employee. He was smarter than that. He chose a small, independent wrestling podcast, one hosted by a former booker known for his deep, almost fanatical respect for the business. The interview was posted on a late Tuesday night with no fanfare. And in it, Jake Henson finally broke his silence. He laid it all out. He spoke of the pre-match briefing. It wasn't about spots or timing. It was, in his words, an execution order. He claimed the directive, which he believed came directly from Triple H and the new corporate heads at Endeavor, was not simply for Solo Sikoa to win. The plan was for John Cena to be utterly and completely annihilated. He said the exact words used were that Cena's character must be erased. The goal was to deliver a beating so one-sided, so psychologically devastating, that the idea of one more run would seem laughable. It was designed to condition the audience to see Cena not as a superhero, but as a relic. According to Jake, the barrage of 10 consecutive Samoan spikes at the end wasn't Solo Sikoa going into business for himself. It was the plan, a drawn-out, humiliating ritual. Jake confessed that his instinct, his duty as a referee, was to step in to check on Cena to call the match, but he remembered the producer's words. Let it play out. He was instructed implicitly to allow the decimation to happen. He was to be a bystander to the murder of a legend. The plan, as Jake explained it, was a brutal, cold-hearted business decision. It was to ensure that the focus would be entirely on the new generation, on the future of the Bloodline saga without the shadow of John Cena looming over it. It was a message to the locker room, to the fans, and to the world. The past is dead. The PG era is over. The age of ruthless corporate narrative had begun. This wasn't wrestling. It was a hostile takeover of a legacy. But why? Why would WWE, the company that John Cena built on his back for over a decade, sanction such a humiliating end for its greatest modern champion? Why would Triple H, a man who himself was a celebrated legend, orchestrate the public execution of a peer? Jake Henson's testimony on that small podcast opened a Pandora's box of backstage politics and corporate power plays. To understand the why, you have to understand the seismic shift that had occurred within WWE. It was no longer just Vince McMahon's kingdom. The company had merged with UFC under the banner of Endeavor, creating a global sports and entertainment behemoth called TKO Group Holdings. With Vince McMahon pushed to the sidelines, Triple H was now the undisputed chief content officer. He was the game, not just in the ring, but in the boardroom. And the game had changed. The narrative Jake Henson exposed was one of brutal corporate efficiency. John Cena, for all his greatness, was the living embodiment of the Vince McMahon era. He was the face of the PG era, a time of colorful shirts, anti-bullying campaigns, and a more family-friendly product. With Endeavor wanting a return on their massive investment, and with Triple H wanting to forge his own distinct creative path, the remnants of the old guard needed to be definitively swept away. This wasn't personal, it was business, the most ruthless business imaginable. Cena's one more run was a liability. His immense popularity, his connection with the audience, could have inadvertently overshadowed the talent Triple H was building the company's future around, namely Roman Reigns and the Bloodline. The plan wasn't just to have Cena pass the torch. It was to snuff his torch out permanently. Think of it from a storyteller's perspective. How do you make your new monster, Solo Sikoa, the most feared man in the company? You don't just have him beat the old hero. You have him dismantle him, piece by piece, in front of the entire world. You have him take the hero's very essence. The defeat was engineered to be so complete that any future return by Cena would be tainted by this memory. He could never again be the never-give-up superhero, because we all saw him not just give up, but be utterly broken. It was a strategic character assassination, disguised as a wrestling match. The hero who built the castle was being torn down, stone, by the very kingdom he created. The ultimate act of loyalty from Cena's perspective was to agree to it, to sacrifice his own myth for the health of the company he loved. But from another perspective, it was the ultimate betrayal. The company he had shown unwavering loyalty to for 20 years demanded his legend as its final pound of flesh. If you're as shocked as we are by this level of backstage politics, hit that like button to show you believe legends deserve respect. In the wake of Jake Henson's bombshell interview, the reaction was not what you might expect. There was no mainstream explosion, no ESPN investigation. Instead, there was a deafening silence. The podcast episode, after gaining a small but intense amount of traction on wrestling forums and Reddit, mysteriously vanished. The original audio file was deleted from the server. The host of the show released a terse statement saying he was pursuing other interests, and the podcast was on indefinite hiatus. Any re-uploads to YouTube were hit with copyright strikes, not by WWE, but by an obscure third-party media group no one had ever heard of. It was a digital cleanup, a professional hit. Jake the Eagle Henson became a ghost. He was effectively blackballed from the entire industry. Friends and other promotions stopped returning his calls. He had broken the one sacred vow of the wrestling business, Omerta, the code of silence, and he was now paying the price. He was in exile. Meanwhile, WWE's corporate PR machine went into overdrive, but with masterful subtlety. They didn't deny the story, they simply ignored it. Instead, they flooded their digital platforms with tributes to John Cena, heartfelt video packages, "Thank you, Cena" photo galleries. Triple H himself tweeted, praising Cena as the standard-bearer and a legend in every sense of the word. It was a masterclass in corporate misdirection. They were celebrating the man while quietly burying the evidence of his character's murder. They were building the statue while hiding the hammer that brought him down. Cena himself remained tellingly quiet about the specifics of the loss. His social media posts were cryptic, emotional, and filled with gratitude towards the fans. He posted a picture of David Beckham from a documentary, a symbolic image of a star at the end of his career. He never spoke of the beating, of Solo Sikoa, or of the finish. He just said thank you and goodbye. It was the response of a good soldier, a loyal employee following the final, most painful order he was ever given. The story of Jake Henson and the Crown Jewel conspiracy became a piece of lost wrestling lore, a whisper in the dark corners of the internet, a what-if story for the most hardcore fans, but the effects lingered. The message sent by the company was crystal clear: no one is bigger than the brand. No legend is safe. If they could do this to John Cena, the man who sold more merchandise, granted more make wishes, and represented the company more purely than anyone in history, then what did it mean for anyone else? It created an undercurrent of fear. The entire ordeal solidified the power of the new regime. It proved they were willing to make the hardest, most unsentimental decisions for the sake of the narrative they wanted to tell. The silence surrounding the event was, in itself, the most damning evidence. It proved that Jake Henson had hit a nerve. He hadn't just told a story. He had exposed a truth. So where does this leave the legacy of John Cena? For 2 decades, he was the indestructible hero, the man who kicked out at 2, who overcame the odds, who never gave up. He was WWE's Superman. But the story exposed by Jake Henson adds a new, dark, and profoundly tragic chapter to his mythos. Does it taint his legacy? Does this calculated, corporate-mandated destruction diminish everything he accomplished? Some might say yes. They might argue that the final image of him, broken and empty in the ring, retroactively weakens the power of his greatest victories. They might see him as a victim, a corporate pawn whose legendary status was sacrificed for a business strategy. The superhero in the end was revealed to be just a mortal man, subject to the whims of his employers. But there is another way to look at it, a more complex and perhaps a more fitting interpretation. This final act doesn't diminish Cena's legacy, it completes it. It makes him human. It transforms him from a 2-dimensional cartoon hero into a 3-dimensional tragic figure worthy of Shakespeare. His entire career was built on 3 words: hustle, loyalty, and respect. For years, we thought that meant loyalty to the fans and respect for the business. But what if the ultimate test of that loyalty was to sacrifice his own pristine image for the future of the company he loved? What if the most respectful act he could perform was to lay down his sword, not in glorious defeat, but in quiet, prearranged surrender, so that a new kingdom could be built on the ruins of his own? This narrative makes his story even more compelling. He wasn't just a hero who won fights. He was a hero who understood the business with such profound depth that he was willing to be a part of his own character's undoing. The loss to Solo Sikoa was no longer just a loss. It was the ultimate act of putting the company first. It was the final, painful payment of a debt he never owed. Was it the most cynical act in modern WWE history, a cold-blooded betrayal of their greatest star? Or was it the last and most meaningful demonstration of hustle, loyalty, and respect imaginable? The truth, as it often does in the shadowy world of professional wrestling, likely lies somewhere in between. John Cena's story is no longer just one of triumph. It is now a story of triumph, power, politics, and sacrifice. It's a story that is more real, more painful, and ultimately more legendary than we ever could have imagined. And it's a story the company will never, ever admit is true. What do you believe? Was it a planned execution to make way for a new era, or just the harsh reality of a hero's final sunset? Subscribe to Ring Legends for more stories that WWE doesn't want you to know. Click that notification bell, and we'll see you in the shadows of the squared circle.